Welcome, Stephanie. Today we have Stephanie Gibson with us for the Eco Interviews. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Fiona?
I'm doing great. So Stephanie is a busy project manager and a dedicated triathlete who lives in St. Petersburg, Florida with her husband, Bill. After she and Bill bought a house together in August 2018, they realized their new home needed a big makeover. The dead lawn in the front and back had to go. Looking for inspiration, they asked, how can we radically transform this space? Hundreds of YouTube videos and research hours later, they've planted over 60 fruiting trees and shrubs, built 5 raised beds, adopted 3 chickens, and poured in a lot of love. Their home has become St. Pete's Micro Farm. So I'm super excited to speak to you because I want to hear more about you, and I also want to hear about how you got into this transformation, buying a home and then starting St. Pete's Micro Farm.
Yeah. So I had never actually done any kind of gardening before. I had my little herb garden in our little apartment. And after we bought the house, a couple weeks later, we volunteered at a community farm. At the time, it was called the St. Pete Eco Village. Now it's called the 15th Street Farm. And we spent the day, we were planting some cover crops, and we got talking to the 2 gentlemen who had started the farm, and sat down, had some fresh papaya, and we're just hanging out talking after we had volunteered all morning. And Bill Bolado was one of the gentlemen, and he recommended I read Gaia's Garden. And it's a book about permaculture for, someone just living on a regular city lot like us. And I was fascinated by the book, and I was like, oh yeah, all of these systems can work together. And we had this house that just had dead grass, and there previously had been a tree in the front yard, and the tree was gone. And so we literally had a blank slate to work with. And so I devoured that book, and then we started digging into some YouTube videos, and I got really interested in a lot of the ones about food forests. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we live in Florida. We can grow all of this cool stuff. And so just digging in, and we just started planting things. And we went to, there's a couple local nurseries that we really like, and got some natives. And then we're always asking, oh, what kind of edible things do you have? And then we ended up meeting a neighbor down the street who completely transformed her yard, and she's got flowers and vegetables and fruiting trees all over her yard. And she just gifted us with a bunch of cuttings, and we've just kind of gone bonkers since then and just planted our entire front yard and our entire backyard. I guess technically it started by mulching the whole thing, which was a lot of work. Thankfully, the city of St. Pete offers free mulch delivery. Well, sorry, the mulch is free and you pay for delivery. And so we got 30 cubic yards of mulch delivered, which is like an entire driveway full. And I think we did that twice and covered the entire front and backyards. And that's how we got started.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you about how you got started, because if you do start with that blank slate, sometimes the soil is like immature and you just can't dig and plant in it. So obviously you had to build up the soil using mulch. That was the idea behind it? Yeah.
Yep. And one of the tips in the Gaia's Garden was the lasagna method, and put down cardboard and then put down your mulch and then put some more cardboard. And we somewhat put the cardboard. We actually did better on the cardboard in the backyard because we do some alley catting, and there's often, free stuff, including free boxes. And so when we acquired enough boxes, we did the entire backyard. But the front yard, we really just started with plain mulch, maybe a couple garbage, like brown paper bags. And then we also started just throwing our food scraps. I'd never composted before in my life. And I always I go places now and I'm like, I go visit my parents and we're chopping strawberries. I'm like, I will take those strawberry tops home with me and put them in my compost bin. So yeah, we really had to work hard on building the soil. It was, live in Florida, it's sand. And it's a work in progress. We're constantly working on building the soil, and mulch is where we started.
Nice. So that might lead us into a little bit of talking about what permaculture is, because the soil is a huge part of it, but it's much more than that. So can you explain a little bit about these natural systems and permaculture as opposed to well, let's do a definition of what we might think of normal landscaping to be, and that would be, very prim and proper, and we bring in inputs from outside. We bring in potting soil, and then we bring in fertilizer, and then we water it, and we plant the plants because they're pretty, or that sort of stuff. And permaculture is a very different take on this. So can you explain what you see permaculture is and how you use that at St. Pete's Micro Farm?
Yeah, I actually really liked your definition of what traditional landscaping is, because it pains me now to drive around my neighborhood. And I remember shortly after we started converting our lawn, I saw someone sitting in their yard on a lawn chair watering their yard, and I was just like, that's just so unfulfilling. Like, so what we've done is we completely, as permaculture principle, there are systems that work together. You work with the soil that you have, you build up the soil, feed the soil, and it will feed you. Yes, we've gotten into a lot of like fruiting trees, and we have fruiting trees to feed us and to feed the birds. We have flowers for the pollinators and for the bees and for the butterflies, and it all works together. We're not bringing in a lot of exotics. We're definitely not bringing in invasives. We're trying to put the right plant in the right spot so that it all works together. One of the things that got me really bought in was, in some of these videos, they're like, oh, it's hardly any work. I'm like, what? How can you have this amazing, beautiful yard with these trees and flowers and all these incredible plants, and it's not a lot of work? And I think that's what that's the beauty of it all. It all works together. You've got your nitrogen fixers building that soil, and you've got your fruits and vegetable trees that, once they're fertilized, they're gonna feed you. And so yeah, it's all systems that work together. Eventually we'll have, rainwater catchment systems, and if you've got low spots in your yard, you plant plants that like water. Or if you've got high spots that stay dry, you plant your drought tolerant plants there. And so it's thinking about the space that you're in and using it wisely and being planful about it. And there's some really cool stuff you can do.
Yeah, I love it's not a lot of work. I've heard it called lazy gardening. I used to joke that if someone asked me, do you know what permaculture is? And I said, yeah, that's our front bed, because we haven't weeded it in like 4 years. Like, I just gave up on that. It was so much work. And it is exciting. Permaculture, regenerative agriculture, is using those natural systems. So instead of spending all that energy raking the leaves that the fruit trees are dropping, the leaves naturally drop, and then they decompose and they're feeding the soil. And it's so funny that as humans, or at least in like Western civilization, we've gone so far away from those natural systems that are in place to help and feed us. So that's super exciting. Did you have you have a neighbor down the street who's doing the same. Did you have any neighbors give you any side eye or pushback?
Luckily, no. That neighbor that gave us some gifts, she had actually kind of gave us a little warning. She has gotten cited several times from the city, and we've been really lucky so far to not have had any problems, because you drive down our street and our house definitely sticks out. You've got green lawn, fruit trees and craziness going on, and then green lawn. And so we're trying really hard to make it beautiful, because I know it can get a little wild and crazy. And so we are aware that we live in a space where we could get cited. But it's beautiful. And we've actually had folks in the neighborhood drive by, and like people we've never met pull in and they say, what is that? Because we have a bunch of papaya trees growing in, and the papaya on the front yard, they're literally bigger than my head. And people come by and they think they're coconuts because they're really that big. And we had somebody else come by and say, what is your secret? What are you doing? I've got a papaya tree and it's this big. So we've definitely started making a name for ourselves. But I think in our little vicinity, it seems like the neighbors have been really supportive and are more curious right now. And so I hope one day that we'll be able to share the bounty that we have. We've got some papayas along the alleyway in the backyard, and one of the neighbors on the other side, she actually came by and asked if she could have one of the green ones to make some hot pepper sauce. And I said, absolutely, here's 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been really cool to have this abundance that you can share. And it's like, I grew this. And there's something also very satisfying about saying, I grew this.
Mm-hmm.
Help from Mother Nature.
Yeah, it's funny, going through the sort of not disciplines, but the, parts of permaculture and regenerative design. It was mentioned like, who do you have around? Well, first of all, who's using your garden? It's not just like me and my husband. It's also my dogs. It's the birds. It's the squirrels. It's rabbits. It's all these things that we need to think of. But then it also said who's next to you and who might have a problem with your garden. What fruit tree can you plant on their side of the yard that they would like? And I'm like, oh, okay, interesting.
Yes, that's really true. Yeah, we've the neighbor right behind us, actually. Well, no, sorry, next to, behind me right now. I think he was a little skeptical at first. And I'm trying to kind of give the olive branch. I've offered tomatoes or some fruit. He still hasn't quite said, "Oh, that's fabulous," but I'm still working on him.
There you go. I think fresh fruit from the yard next door is an amazing gift. So tell us, brag on your bounty. I follow you on Facebook. Obviously, we know each other. I am extremely jealous of the Florida growing season because you have tomatoes in winter, and I'm sitting here like, oh my God, we still have stuff in the tent, and like maybe in 2 months we'll have something. And so tell us about everything that you grow.
Yeah. So when I first moved to Florida, I actually had to like flip my thinking about what is in season. What is season? I was part of a CSA. I moved from DC. I was part of a CSA, and I got here in the wintertime, and it was spring, and I was like, all right, I'm going to join a CSA. It was May, and all the CSAs were done. The season was over. And so that was a shift I had to make. And now as I've started growing annual vegetables, I've got, let's see, the bed right here has dill. So I've got some herbs. I've got dill, thyme, sage. I'm still working on being successful on my basil. It's not been so happy with me.
We're good at basil, so when we get some,
yeah. Oregano, rosemary. Those are the herbs. Oh, and I've got some cilantro and parsley in that as well. As you mentioned, my tomatoes. We have. I planted. Let's see. I started the seeds in July of last year, and I started 6. And 3 of them were one variety, 2 were another variety, and the third one was Everglades tomato. Everglades tomato is, you can tell by the name, it does well in Florida. It's got Everglades in the name. Mm-hmm. And the Everglades tomato has completely overtaken the entire bed. There's volunteers everywhere. So I fill up a bowl every day of just these itty bitty, they call them currant tomatoes because they're so tiny. So I've got those going right now. I'm looking out my window in the dark. We have a ton of papayas. I think we have at least 20 papaya trees, and most of them are fruiting. And the problem with papaya is that they take a really long time to ripen. And so I've been impatiently waiting for these green ones to ripen, but you can eat them green as a vegetable. We've got, what else is fruiting? I've got my avocado is growing really well. It's not fruiting yet. It's still young. We bought it at a yard sale for $2, and it was probably a foot tall. And now it is over 6 feet tall, and that was probably about a year ago.
Amazing.
Another tree that grows really well here is moringa. So you know that fancy schmancy expensive powder. Mm-hmm. We were gifted at that 15th Street farm. We were gifted 2 sticks, about 2 feet long. Mm-hmm. Stuck them in the ground, and I've got 2 trees in the backyard that are 20 feet tall.
Wow.
So there's just so much you can grow here. We've got I'm working on the perennial vegetables because that's another permaculture thing. It's not just your annual raised beds that you're turning over all the time. They're a lot of work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The perennial vegetables and the perennial fruits are really, I think, one of the key components of a food forest or a permaculture designed garden. And so we've got Okinawan spinach. We have longevity spinach. We've got katuk. All of those are really powerhouse greens that you can saute or just eat raw. They're quite delicious. Our mulberry trees are starting to go pretty crazy. They're not quite ripened yet, but they just have buds everywhere. I'm looking forward to our purple passion fruit. We've got a lot of the beautiful flowers, but none of them have been pollinated quite yet. Strawberries. It's I'm getting strawberries right now, which is pretty exciting. But my summers are quiet. So summers in my raised beds, I can do like okra and peas, like black-eyed peas. Thankfully, all of the other like perennial greens, I think a lot of them are Asian greens. Like I think katuk might even be from, I want to say Thailand. I'm not quite sure, but they thrive in the heat. And so that's the other thing, is like finding what works well in Florida and in our climate. It very rarely freezes here, so I don't have that to be concerned with. But I've got hurricanes, I've got winds, I've got different challenges. So yeah, I've got a lot going on. The list goes on. Oh, bananas. I'm like fingers crossed that one of them is starting to get a flower on it. I'm hoping that when I come back from training camp this coming weekend, it'll actually be fully out, and I'll be like, yes, we've got a banana rack.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm so jealous. Yeah, I'll just maybe in the summer when we've got stuff, then yours is lying low, then we can compete. Yeah, it's amazing. We don't have bananas. We have an avocado tree, but we can't seem to get the fruit. So it's like we're right on the edge. We're kind of pushing it, trying to have an avocado tree, but we'll see how it goes.
What zone are you guys in?
8A.
8A. Okay, I think I'm 10A.
I only know that because I asked my husband today. So like, don't take it as like I know exactly what I'm talking about. My husband has been the farmer gardener for the past 5 years, and then he's not a very good teacher, so I've been taking this regenerative gardening course and just learning about it. And
that is so cool.
Yeah, one of the big things, this is silly, but one of the big things that my teacher goes on about, you're talking about nitrogen. Have you started peeing in the yard yet?
Maybe.
Yes.
One of the neighbors, she's got 3 kids, and I remember we were over there walking around her yard because she's got a beautiful yard. She's got chickens and ducks, and just amazing. And one of her kids, or like she was telling us that as a family, they used to collect their urine. And one of the girls was like, Mom, when are we going to do that again? So she's teaching them young. And I was like, yes, go Mom.
I know, it's nitrogen. So people who don't know what we're talking about and think we're absolute freaks, it's like nitrogen. I mean, people pay for like ammonia fertilizer, which is basically what we're peeing out every single day. So it would be very strange for my husband to pee on our fruit trees in the front yard. I mean, our front yard is very exposed, but I'm still like, as of this week, like, do you think we can have a bucket in the house? I think we can have a bucket. Can we do it? Like I'm trying, or can I train the dogs to aim that way? Yeah, they're old. They're not getting there. They just seem to pee in the same spots. But I know but that's part of like permaculture, regenerative agriculture, is all these natural systems that we just consider as like human waste, whether it's our food, whether it's our urine or our feces. I'm not using that, but that takes us to compost, one of my favorite subjects ever. Talk to me about your compost and how that works in your yard.
So we started by having one of those barrels that you buy at the store. I think we had been gifted it. We filled that thing up so fast. And I was just like, we need a bigger space to do this. And so we just started, not just, but after that, we transitioned to throwing all of our food scraps and mulch and leaves and whatever we found into one of the raised beds. And so that was our compost pile. And I didn't cover it. I just kind of let it do its thing. I'm a very lazy composter. I don't have the 3 bins. I don't turn. I just kind of let it do its thing. And when I need soil, I kind of go to the one bed that's still kind of our working compost bin and dig down real deep. I'm like, there's my gold. So we do a lot of so we use one of the raised beds. We do a lot of just compost in place. If I've got, I say one of the other good things for bananas is bananas. So I throw the banana peels, I throw my coffee grinds, I throw everything in. We have a banana ring out front and then we have another one in the back. And so I throw a lot of it in the banana ring, or anything that else is a heavy feeder. I'll just throw all the food scraps right there. Sometimes cover it up with some mulch. Let the bugs do the thing. And a lot of the times it's really not that bad. Like this, I don't think I've had an issue with the smell of compost ever. I think the worst smell we have is, going back to the pee and poop thing, we use natural cat litter. And so we've started putting that out in the yard in certain places to fertilize around some of the plants. So that is the only thing that's given off a little bit of a stink. And we have a friend who gives us rabbit poop. Rabbit poop is also another great fertilizer. I've seen a definite difference in the beds that we used rabbit poop in versus the ones we didn't.
Oh, nice.
Oh, and then chicken poop. Duh.
I was going to say, tell us about, next question was, talk to us about how the chickens work into the system, because man, I'm getting 16 chickens and they're going and doing their thing. So I need to know what they're going to do.
Yes. So one of the really cool things, so we only have 3 girls, and all of the raised beds that Bill and I built are 8 by 4. So I think it's like the standard size comes as an 8 foot and then just one cut. Just so happens that we found a coupe / tractor on Craigslist that was 8 feet by 4 feet. And so it's about, I think it's a prefab one, probably from Tractor Supply. And it's probably got 2 feet tall run of chicken wire all around it. And then on the one half, there's a little coop that fits 3 hens. They say you can fit 6 in there. I don't know that I trust it. But that's the coop where they go in, and it's, I think it's intended to be just a run that you can move around. Well, we stick it on top of one of the raised beds and let them work there for a while. And then right now all the other ones are in use. So probably after the tomatoes are done running their course, we'll move them to that bed. And the one that they just came off of is great for for whatever I'm going to plant next. They've done their job there. We let them free range most of the time. This winter, we actually kept them inside a little bit more because I had seen some hawks flying around. And one of the neighbors who has chickens, she said she lost one of her girls. And so I kept them inside for the winter, but I let them out all day today, and they're just so much happier. And so they're fertilizing everything. I truly think that one of the reasons why the avocado has just taken off is that the girls really like to dig and poop right under there. And so they're fertilizing it and making it grow beautifully. So so they're just doing their thing. They are a little bit annoying because on the last raised bed, I've got broccoli, and I don't have yet a barrier. So they just jump up and they've totally destroyed the broccoli leaves. I'm in the process of building an anti-chicken raised bed something. But I'm like, you know what? They're happy. They're out. They're getting good greens. I'm okay.
Yeah.
They are great. I'm excited that you're getting chickens.
I am too. Nature's little helpers. And that's something my husband had mentioned, that we'll have to figure out something to wall off our active beds. And I don't think we can put the chickens on top of them just because we have too many. But that's another good point. You mentioned once the tomatoes are done, I imagine that you practice like a no-till style of gardening, which is like, for people who aren't into permaculture and regenerative ag, like, is mind-blowing that you don't, when you're done, you don't pull everything out and then turn up the soil. So what do you do? Is like, I did a little chop and drop yesterday. It was so fulfilling, where you just we had like dead Mexican petunias. They're just big dry stalks, and my teacher said the energy is up here and it needs to be on the ground. So you just chop them and leave them there. So talk about when your tomatoes are done, exactly what you're going to do.
Well, I haven't quite thought that far ahead, but I think, like exactly like you said, just knock them down, probably cover it over with some mulch, and then put the girls back on top of it. It's
done, and let them do their thing.
Yeah, we do. One of the other permaculture principles, or I don't know, buzzwords maybe, is the chop and drop. And so we have Mexican sunflower. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't. No, I don't know.
So I saw a video by Pete Canaris, Green Dreams. He's like one of the YouTubers I follow all the time, and I've learned a lot from him. But I believe in the video he said he calls it nature's fertilizer. Pound for pound, it is equivalent to chicken manure, and so and it grows like a weed. It's another one where you take a cutting, stick it in the ground, and we've got 10-foot tall green leafy plants, and then they have these beautiful sunflowers that the bees love. And so you could just chop, drop, putting nitrogen back into the soil, and it looks like, oh, those plants look sad for like a day. And then they've grown back, and I think every 2 months maybe we do a good round of chop and drop to keep them lower and bushier and fertilize the ground.
It's so cool. Have you gotten into one of the things we realize when we get the chickens, and even just now, because we have really been, well, now there's 2 people working in the garden, me and my husband. And so we're really going through like the compost that we created. And my husband is worried, like, if we get chickens, we're going to need even more. And so in my co-working space, I've started a composting bucket there, and we're going to have to start divvying up, like, you know, the fresh scraps are going to the chickens, and then this is going in the compost pile. Have you struggled at all with getting your compost together? Or are you taken from other places?
I haven't. I really want to. Like, there's a number of breweries in St. Pete, and I have heard from other, like, I follow a couple other permaculture folks that are local on Instagram, and I see them, they say, yes, I scored this, like the mash from the brewery, or, oh, this local coffee shop gave me all of their grounds. I'm part of a CSA here. And he has built his soil. He had a partnership with one of the local companies, and I've seen him just hauling loads of coffee grinds. And there's a whole bunch of composting programs in St. Pete. And I have friends who their house is a drop-off site. And so I've considered doing that as well. I think the only kind of donation or help, I remember talking to our neighbors next door one time, and said, yeah, if you've got any extra food scraps, send them our way. And they gave us these Tupperwares of like things from their barbecue that was like chicken, and like there was some stuff that was usable, but other stuff was like, it's the thought that counts. But I'm going to start teaching you what we can compost and what we can't. So
yeah,
that's really where I think there's so much anyone can do. It's so easy. Like, you do not need to throw out the butt of your lettuce or the stem of your broccoli. Like, compost that, put it back into the ground.
Yeah, I just wrote like a sign because at my co-working space, someone had brought a bucket in for composting maybe a year and a half ago, and they'd kind of been in charge of it, and people had gotten to a habit, but it's kind of been left alone and not taken care of. But I made a sign because I remember, like, when I first started, composting was kind of intimidating. I didn't really know what went in it. But once you get in the habit, so I made a little sign that says, what can go in the compost? Coffee filter plus coffee grounds, like immediately in an office, that goes in the compost bin.
Yeah.
Food scraps, banana peels, orange peels, and then I'm like, no meat.
Yeah.
We don't have that type of compost pile. Like, we can't guarantee. I hear that as long as your compost pile is 140 degrees Fahrenheit for more than 48 hours, it kills any sort of bugs. But we're like you, we're lazy composters. We just do pile composting. So we've not taken a temperature, and we're not doing all that. So no meat. We're not doing that. But you can put eggshells in it. You know, we do that. Paper towels. Cardboard minus the tape, and we're also going to be saving cardboard to do lasagna mulching, just like you mentioned. So cardboard down over grass or whatever, or the immature soil. So we were talking about soil, you have to build it up. Most of our soil has been completely depleted of anything because we've been growing grass on it, or there's been water runoff, or just hasn't been taken care of. So you have to build it up. So you do your cardboard, and then manure, and then, you know, whatever else is kind of like brown green. And I feel like we should do a whole composting interview, to be honest with you, to get into it, because I love it. But the exciting thing are these systems that it doesn't need to go to the landfill. In fact, that stuff that goes to the landfill doesn't even break down the way it should. So when I was a kid and we would eat fruit, my dad would tell us to throw the fruit out the window of the car. But he was like, that's the only thing. He's like, the animals will get it. It will break down. But I think people think that the same holds true if you stick it in the bin, because I've had people say to me, oh, I get diapers that can be composted. And I said, well, do you compost them? And they said, no. And I'm like, okay, well, what happens when it goes to the landfill? Landfill is full of plastic, it's full of chemicals. It's not the natural decomposing process that we have in a compost pile. So, I mean, it's just amazing to take our waste and then turn it into fuel for our food. And it's a extremely, fulfilling cycle to be part of, for sure.
Have you seen, it was an Anthony Bourdain documentary. I think I want to say it was called Wasted. And it's all about how wasteful we are. And like, it takes, what is it, 20 years for a head of lettuce to decompose in the landfill? Like something absolutely ridiculous. And you're like, it's just this little thing. And if you had just stuck it in the ground, you'd be building your soil.
Yes.
It's like so simple. So yeah, I love composting, and it's definitely changed the way I think about my food waste. I mean, we eat mostly vegetarian here, and so I always have parts of the fruit or vegetables that are not, not something I want to eat. So I'll either give them to the chickens, which is another great thing, or I'll just go throw them in the yard. And I can feel good about that, but it's like, it's not in the landfill. And like, if more people would do this, we'd be in such a better place. It pains me to be somewhere where I'm like, I have to throw my banana peel out. No, yes. I'm just going to take it with me and go dig a hole and stick it in the ground.
Well, it has to be mentioned for people who don't know me and Stephanie. We both are on the same triathlon team, and we've both been to triathlon camps together. And one of our favorites by Tri Marnie is her Greenville camp, because it's held at the Swamp Rabbit Inn Properties, which is like a working mini farm. And me and Stephanie were like stopping our fellow campers from throwing stuff in the bin and running out and giving it to chickens and throwing it in the compost. I'm like, don't. I'm like, give me. Because, I don't want anything more to go in the bin than absolutely necessary. So let's talk a little bit about, because it's rolling in naturally, how does regenerative gardening and permaculture help our environmental situation? I think we've talked about it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is the stuff's not going in the landfill. And isn't there a statistic, like if every person in the world planted a tree, we could reverse the effects of climate change? I mean, so I'm like, let me plant as many as I can. So, I mean, it's being mindful of your environment, your surroundings. There's so much we think we need, but we really don't. And so, I think this has really taught me to kind of get back to our roots. Like, we all worked in the dirt, and I've just been providing food for myself. I don't have to go to the store. I don't have to use the plastic bag. I don't have to use gas to get to the store. I don't have to get, the truck that transported it from 10 states away. It's from right here. And we're not using a ridiculous amount of water. That's another permaculture thing, is you're using the resources. You're trying to maximize what your current environment is. And so I'm not running my sprinklers all the time to mow or to water my green grass, and that has chemicals that run off into the street, which then run off into the bay. We water when we need to. Yes, the raised beds do take a little bit more water, but rainy season is coming and my fruit trees will be quite happy without me doing anything extra. And we have well water, which has been great. We're going to build the rain catchment system. We've got to install some gutters first, but we've got a rain barrel that's going to be one of the things on our to-do list. So there's just all these little things that you can do, and you don't, in your day-to-day, you don't think about all those, like, how did this tomato get to me in this Publix grocery store right now? Like, it costs a lot of energy to get to you. And so the fact that I can just walk 10 steps and go get one, I feel like I'm doing my little part to help climate change.
For sure, I agree. It's a very fulfilling, you know, just as you mentioned, the energy that it takes to produce the fruit that's just outside your door is so much less than having something shipped across the world. And then that's how I started. Well, with my husband growing this stuff, it excited me to be able to cook out the yard, and then it became the composting. Now I see it's all like little circles. It's starting very small, whatever that is for you.
Yes.
You know, it could be totes instead of using plastic bags or whatever. And then once you're comfortable with that, it builds out and it builds out. So now I'm getting excited about, like I said, my co-working space, like bringing in the compost. And then I want to get in touch with someone at the city about what they do with their wood chips. Like, you know, there's municipalities that are chopping trees all the time, and they just take the wood chips to the dump, and the wood chips can be used. It is actually amazing how much stuff that we get rid of that is so incredibly useful.
Yes.
And yet we pay for chemical fertilizers. And like I said, we have all the chemicals we need coming through our body and out of the sky and up from the ground, you know, and spending lots of money on getting someone to chop down an ugly tree in your very, very backyard, when if it just falls and lies there. I mean, it is a different mind shift because it is different from those manicured landscaped lawn things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's something very beautiful, and it's exciting as well. I imagine you get wildlife coming into your yard. What sort of wildlife do you guys get there?
I was so excited today because I saw my first hummingbird in the yard.
Oh, yes.
It was all like really quick and really like, I don't think they come around Florida very often. I think it might be a little too hot. But we've got a honeysuckle in the backyard, and I just happened to look out and I was like, oh my gosh. So I've gotten a ton of birds. So woodpeckers, blue jays, crows, hawks. There is a bald eagle that kind of has been hanging out in this neighborhood. Again, makes me a little nervous about the chickens, but lots of birds. I saw a possum walking across the yard the other day. We get bats at night. Tons of squirrels. They're a little bit of a pain sometimes, but again, when you've got enough, it's been kind of fun to watch the tomatoes. I see these the mockingbirds. They go in, and I see them grab a little bitty tomato and fly away, and I'm like, that's really cool. Like if I had like one plant with, you know, 5 little tomatoes, I'd be like, oh, my poor tomatoes, but there's plenty to share. And so that's one of the things I'm also looking forward to, is like, as we continue to grow, we watched the movie the Biggest Little Farm.
I haven't seen it yet. I really want to see it.
Oh my gosh, you have to see it. You have to see it. Because one of the things they were talking about in there is it takes, I can't remember if it was 5 or 7 years for the ecosystem to kind of settle, kind of come to a place of equilibrium. And so there are going to be times early on where, you know, all the fruit gets eaten, or there's an infestation of pests of some sort. And so you find like one thing that was really cool in their farm was there was slugs that were attacking one of the fruit trees, and they brought in their ducks to eat the slugs. And so this is how nature works. It's supposed to be like this. And so figuring out how you can do that in your own little space, and then seeing what happens. So yeah, wildlife has been mostly birds, but I'm sure there's much more interesting things to come.
Certainly. Yeah, we had the same thing about, so we're probably 5 seasons into planting, and about the 3rd year we had an infestation of hornworms that just decimated the kale. And hornworms are nasty. Like, I just wanted to pick them off, but my husband's like, they'll bite you, don't do that. They're just, they're horrible. And it just had to have that year. It was a combination of, well, they were around, and then I wasn't picking the kale enough, because there's also that when you're starting to get into the ecological movement, this idea that humans are destructive to everything around them. So I certainly came in that way, where it was like a hands off, like you want to leave things alone. But something I've learned through actual practice, and then also through my course, is that our plants, especially the ones that we eat, have been domesticated. Well, we have domesticated them along with us, and they actually thrive with us interacting with them. So as I pick the kale off, it does better because that is exactly what it was bred to do. So me leaving the kale for as long as I did, like, oh, I don't want to use it, was just right for a bug infestation to just absolutely decimate it. And now every day I'm out there getting the kale. For some reason, my dog likes kale, so I have to kick her out of the flower bed. I don't know what she's doing eating kale, but they're into that. And it just does better. And we had one year where we just had a ton of problems and we still never sprayed any sort of chemicals. And it's kind of hopefully worked itself out. I never want to jinx it. I don't want this year to be another like, ugh, but
that's
it's good.
A good reminder, because I often will let things go. I'm like, look, it's growing. Like, I'm just so proud that I was able actually to grow, because this really is my first season growing anything in raised beds. And so that's a really good reminder that I need to harvest. Like this tonight for dinner, I went out and picked one of the greens, and we had dumpster dough for some other things earlier this week. And so I used that plus the greens from the garden and made us some dinner. And so, that's a really good reminder. I need to just go out and pick stuff. It'll be okay.
Yes, do it. Yeah. And it took me learning the hard way to understand that. This year I've really been like, oh, wow. And then also in my course talking about how you have to prune your fruit trees. Like I'm all about just like letting them be. And we've had some camellias that are looking pretty rough. And then I went out for my first chop and drop yesterday, and then I looked at those camellias and I was like, well, you haven't been doing well because I haven't taken care of you. Like you should have been pruned properly. And I'm just sitting here like, oh, don't touch it. But they're domesticated plants. They need a little bit of help. So you got to get in there. It's actually, have you read Braiding Sweetgrass by any chance, that book?
No, not yet. It's on my list. You shared it the other day, and someone else who I know also was like, this is a really great book. You need to read it. So that is on my list.
Fantastic. And I don't think it's a spoiler, but at the end it comes around because it's not a linear story. It's very much a wandering combination of indigenous knowledge with scientific botany. So it's just cool. Super amazing. But it opens with the sweetgrass and it closes with the sweetgrass with showing that sweetgrass that's left alone does much worse than the sweetgrass that was tended by people. And it's just shown over and over again that these are plants that are supposed to be brought up with humans. And I think that's a really encouraging story to have in our systems right now as we battle the climate crisis. It's just very easy to be like, climate change is human exacerbated. There is a certain element that's okay, but we're basically going to the extreme. But that can make us want to withdraw and say that we're a cancer on the planet and we shouldn't be here. And that's not the truth either. We shouldn't be, overly zealous and, exploitative of stuff, but we also shouldn't retract so much that we don't exist. We are part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
So what are your plans for St. Pete's Microfarm?
So I want to, it's so hard because I'm like, I just want everything. I want it to be like, fast forward 5 years from now and see all of the glorious tree. I'm like, no, like the process is important too. And the learning and watching things grow. Like I don't have any kids, but I sometimes feel like my little seedlings are my kids. I love watching them grow. And so, I think in 5 years, definitely want to have the rain barrels up. We want to have an Airbnb. Really want to be able to show people like, look what you can do in your yard. Like we live on a modest lot. We don't live, we're not right downtown. We're on the south side of town. But it's so easy. Just get in there and start. And so the Airbnb is definitely one thing that's on the docket. I think I really want to be able to share with people, like exactly what you're saying. Like you started a compost thing at your co-working space. And actually I was at the office last week and as I was throwing out my banana peel, I was like, oh, I really wish this building had a compost. And so I think I would like to have a community compost drop off or something like that. I really just want to share how awesome this is. Like it is so cool that you can grow a mango, like grow a fig, like these things that you find at the grocery store, you have the ability to grow it in your own backyard, which is super cool. So yeah, just more sharing of the knowledge. That's really what I would like to do.
Well, awesome. I'm glad to be able to provide a platform to share, for you to share it on. And how can people follow St. Pete's Microfarm so that you can share even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're on Instagram and Facebook. What is I think our Instagram is just St. Pete Microfarm. Let me see if there's any underscores in there. Yeah, nope, no underscore, and just St. Pete Microfarm on Instagram. And then we're also on Facebook. I think Facebook has the period for Saint, so it makes it tricky about St. Petersburg. But yeah, you can find us there. Follow along. I was just out in the yard earlier today doing some Instagram stories. I just love sharing pictures of how beautiful this space is and what's growing in our backyard.
Yeah, one of the fun things I found about growing is actually seeing what the vegetables look like when they grow as opposed to how you buy them in the grocery store, right? Like what a stalk of Brussels sprouts looks like because we buy them already chopped, right? Or like that a zucchini has this massive big zucchini flower and all of that sort of stuff. And that was something I just wasn't aware of because we buy our stuff from the supermarket, you know?
And the broccoli, like I'm so excited because I was gifted some broccoli baby seedlings, and so they finally started to have the crown, but there's all these leaves and you never see any of those leaves when you get it at the grocery store. So absolutely, I totally hear you. And carrots, like carrots have all this cool bushy stuff that you can also eat.
I love carrot greens and carrot tops. And I also, and you see as well how broccoli and Brussels sprouts are related because they look actually exactly the same when they're growing, except that you get the little nodules for the Brussels sprouts. We tried to grow broccoli and it's not been successful so far. We had it took 8 months to get one crown. Maybe we'll try again. We did that one wrong, but it's fun. It's the experimentation, right? You just don't know, and you don't know what's going to do well in your soil. And as we build the soil, that's going to change, and depending on the seasons. And I think it makes you a lot more grateful for how things happen because you put the work in. You know? Yeah,
it's all trial and error. Like one of the things about permaculture is the design element, and I'm a planner, a project manager, and so I wanted to plan out, here's where everything is going to go. And Bill is much less of a planner than I am. He plans some things, but a lot of it has been in his head, and he's thinks that things are going to go, and I just trust. And we've moved things trial and error, but for the most part, things have just been thriving. You see what parts of the yard get the most sun, and you see what parts are the shadiest. And so we have had to move some things that we thought based on what we read that it was shade tolerant. Nope, it needs more sun. And so we need to move, or vice versa. And so, there's all kinds of cool things that you can do. And it's been lots of fun.
Have you tried any hugelkultur yet, or have you read about that?
Yes, I've read about it. Ish. So, and I say ish because when we moved in, we were told that in the very front of the yard there had been a pine tree, and the pine tree was we've seen pictures of it. The pine tree was ginormous, and so they chopped it down and buried it, and there's this mound, and that's where the roots are. And so, sure, we're not putting lots of pieces of wood on top because I think that's really what the hugelkultur is, but it was kind of already in place. The foundation of it was started. And so that's actually where our banana patch is, even though it is a little higher and bananas do like it to be wet. And so it would make a little more sense to do it lower. They've been thriving right where we put them. So I say it's all because of the pine tree that used to be there.
Nice. Yeah. So hugelkultur, we're doing it-ish as well. And it's because I know someone who's into permaculture, and she just kept saying, you could do hugelkultur. And basically, for people who don't know what this is, and I'm sure not very many people do, and I might be getting this wrong, but the base of it is any sort of decomposing or rotting wood. And then you build up compost and soil on top, and then you plant on it. And so my husband's not real excited about the ideas of mounds. So our hugelkultur-ish was digging a hole, and then we have plenty of decomposing wood on our property because we have old trees and some of them are falling. We put that down, and then we put leaves, and then we put compost, and then we put this is something I would want to ask you about. We were advised to put in C90, which is basically a bunch of sea salt, because we don't have the minerals in our soil. It's been washed out. And so by putting sea salt back in, the idea is that our minerals in our soil have been washed out to the ocean, and we're not naturally getting them back. And so you put the sea salt in, which would have the minerals. or seaweed, and we don't have any source for seaweed, so we use sea salt. And then we put more soil, and I've put potatoes in there, and we topped it with straw, and supposedly just let them be. And so we'll see how our kind of hugelkultur goes. But you're next to the ocean, so maybe you don't need to do the sort of sea mineral stuff.
Yeah, I've heard people do that. I haven't, but I do know people, or I've seen people locally who go to the beach and pick up seaweed and put it in their garden, get those minerals. We're in an interesting place in Florida. So we're in Pinellas County, which is a little peninsula, and we are actually a couple blocks we're very far south on the peninsula. A couple blocks to our east is Tampa Bay. A couple blocks, probably maybe about a mile south is the rest of the bay that goes into the Gulf. And so then the other direction east of us, a couple miles, is the Gulf. And so we are surrounded, and that creates its own unique little microculture here in our little couple block radius that is even different than downtown St. Pete. We sprouted a coconut. There's a couple blocks over. We were out for a run, or I was out for a run, and I was like, hey, here's some coconuts. Let me take them back with me. And so we stuck a couple of them in the ground, and one of them sprouted, which was crazy. I've never seen that before. Things you don't expect. And we were told by Bill, the guy that we met at the farm where we volunteered, they had tried at that farm, which is a couple miles north of here and a little bit inland. They tried to grow coconuts there, and it wouldn't happen. And so just where we are, we've got the right combination of salt air and salt in the ground and the humidity and the temperature that we can grow coconuts.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I may try some salt, but I don't think we really need it.
No, I think if it's blowing in, then you're probably getting it in the air anyway. Yeah. That's cool. It's interesting to learn more about microclimates or those things. I really want to go to the closest. There's actually the Catawba tribe that weren't technically moved off their land. They always had a spot, and of course it's been shrunk. But they're only an hour away from me, and I really want to go up there and see what they have in terms of what they would plant. And so
that'd be so cool.
Yeah, to find out what's very local here. So
yeah, I think we have a Catawba grape. I'm assuming it was named after that tribe. I don't know how well it's going to do here, but we'll see. They say muscadine grapes do better, but
muscadine is very popular here. My father-in-law grew muscadine very easily. So.
Cool.
Well, what sort of advice would you give someone who's just waking up to the climate crisis?
There's a quote that I often say: the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And so I really think planting a tree, if you've got space for it, plant a tree, preferably one that provides fruit or shade, or it's native to where you live. I live in Florida, so shade trees are great. So that's what I would say. Plant a tree, or even do something. Compost that banana peel.
Yeah. Oh man, if we could do like a composting revolution, I'd be totally down with that.
You and me with some t-shirts and some signs.
I mean, it's interesting. My brother and his wife live in Switzerland, and in a condo. And so when they're taking the trash out, they have their normal sort of like walled off trash, like we would, big gate. And then behind that is a compost pile. And so I'm like, oh, do you compost? And he's like, I put it in there. I don't know who turns it, but that's what they do. It's just very, so cool. Very natural, and I don't see why we can't do something similar here. And compost doesn't stink. I know you said yours doesn't, it doesn't smell. We don't have a smell problem. It doesn't. Yeah. Doesn't smell.
Not hard. It's super easy. Anyone can do it.
For real. Well, Steph, I've had such a good time talking to you, and
so good to see you.
And I'm looking forward to continuing to follow St. Pete's Micro Farm on Facebook. I'm going to get on Instagram. I haven't followed on Instagram yet, so I need to get on there and do that. And maybe we can check back in on when's a big fruiting season for you. If summer is not it, then when do you guys get a lot of stuff?
Oh gosh. I'm a planner, big nerd. I create an Excel spreadsheet with a list of all of the fruits that we have, and then the months across the year, the months across the top, and have like when things are going to fruit. So I'd have to check back in. our stuff is still pretty young.
Mhm.
But I think right now our peaches got some blooms on it. Our mango's got some blooms on it. I don't know, fall maybe?
Mhm.
Yeah. I can look back at my spreadsheet and give you a better time too.
Oh my goodness, spreadsheet. You are a planner. You're a project manager. I feel like I am, but I don't have that. I'm kind of just like, let them be. They'll come when they come. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Steph. I really appreciate you
Thank
being on here
you.
with us.
It
And
was great.
we'll certainly be following you and everything that's happening in your yard.
Sounds great. Thanks, Fiona.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye.
Bye.